This video is going to contain some spoilers for the Indigo Disk DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, so consider yourself warned. So the Indigo Disk DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has been out for a little bit at this point, and it's brought along with it a lot of really cool info and lore, but also at the same time, it's also brought along some really fascinating and interesting unsolved mysteries. And now that the dust has kind of settled a little bit on the Indigo Disk's release, I thought that now would be a good time to dive into these mysteries, discuss them a little bit, and see if we can't potentially figure them out for ourselves. Okay, so I have got two major mysteries from the DLC that I am going to be discussing in this video that I feel like are the biggest and most prominent unsolved questions that the Indigo Disk has to offer. And the first one that I'm going to be getting into is the identity of Lacey's mom. Lacey is, of course, one of Blueberry Academy's Elite Four, and she's also the daughter of Clay, the gym leader of Driftvale City in the Unova region. This is obviously a huge revelation, but it also brings up a question. If Lacey's dad is Clay, then who is Lacey's mom? The DLC does not go into this in any way, shape, or form, hence why it's an unsolved mystery, but it's obviously very intriguing at the same time, so much so that the community has already had a bunch of discussion about it. So I'm going to talk about what the community has been discussing with regards to this mystery, as well as provide my own ideas as to who I think the potential mother of Lacey could be. The most prominent theory that's out there about this at this time is that Lacey's mom could potentially be Alessa. There are a number of reasons why people have come to this conclusion. However, personally, I feel like this is not even close to true and is kind of a ridiculous idea, to be honest. So I'm going to explain both sides of the issue as well as get into some other potential candidates for the identity of Lacey's mom as well. One of the reasons why people started thinking that Alessa could be Lacey's mom is because of a fake quote that started making the rounds online that people kinda just started to gobble up and spread around and assumed was true. This is one of the reasons why I think this is ridiculous, because one of its main pieces of evidence is literally and already confirmed to be fake. So we're not really starting off on a great note for the Alessa theory. However, that isn't the only piece of evidence in favor of this idea, because another big piece is that when you first arrive at Blueberry Academy and meet Lacey for the first time, she challenges you to a battle, and the Pokemon that she uses in this battle with you are Plusle and Minun, who are electric-type Pokemon, which is obviously the type specialty of Alessa. However, in my own personal opinion, this can easily be written off as well, because number one, even though Plusle and Minun are electric types, Alessa has never ever used them herself in the main series games. Ever. Number two, it's very easy to see the actual reason why she is using Plusle and Minun here in the first place, because this is the first battle in the DLC that you have, and Blueberry Academy consists entirely of double battles because that's kind of its thing. So using Plusle and Minun, who are literally the double battle Pokemon for the first double battle of this DLC, is simply serving as an introduction to the double battle concept that Blueberry Academy has, and that's literally all that is going on here. The third piece of evidence for this theory, however, is actually pretty solid and plausible, because it can't immediately be written off like the other evidence can. This evidence is that it is stated in the DLC that Lacey is from Nimbasa City, which is the city that Alessa resides in as gym leader. It's also a curious place for her to be from, considering that her dad, Clay, is the gym leader in Driftvale City, so you would naturally expect her to be from Driftvale as well. And while I personally can't say anything to refute this evidence in support of this Alessa theory, I also don't think it's a big deal either, because Nimbasa City is also right next to Driftvale City, so it's very easy for Clay and Lacey to potentially actually live in Nimbasa, while Clay is the gym leader in Driftvale. People commute from one city to another for work all the time, so it's not that far-fetched to assume that that could be the case here as well. Also, there's just the fact that Lacey looks nothing whatsoever like Alessa at all. And when it comes to Pokemon characters that are the relatives or descendants of other Pokemon characters, they make a point to make those characters look very much like one another most of the time. Even Lacey, who doesn't really look that much like Clay admittedly, does have those gemstones in her hair clip that Clay also has in his hat, and Leon, their ancestor, has in his hat as well, tying them all together and signaling that yes, they're all a part of the same family. If we look at Lacey and try to find something like that with regards to Alessa, there is literally nothing whatsoever, or at least nothing that's obvious that you would expect if she was actually Lacey's mom. And I think that's kind of an important point here, because since Pokemon has such a track record of making their relative characters look so much like one another, and we already know that Lacey doesn't really look anything like her dad outside of that hair clip that ties the two together, that would sort of indicate that Lacey probably looks a lot like her mom, and she obviously doesn't look anything like Alessa, so for all intents and purposes, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think the Alessa theory is even close to being true. I could always be proven wrong, admittedly, because we obviously don't know for sure, but I really do not think this is the case, which is why I have started to look for some other candidates instead, and I have found a couple. I don't have anyone who I definitively believe is Lacey's mom, which means this is going to stay an unsolved mystery for the time being, but I do have some interesting candidates to talk about. The obvious, most definitive feature about Lacey from a physical perspective is her pink hair. So the first thing I went and did was look for anyone in the Unova games and then just in Pokemon in general who had pink hair who could potentially fit the bill of being Lacey's mother. And the first person I came up with was Anthea, N's adopted sister. Anthea does have pink hair, which at the very least makes her a person of interest in my opinion as far as who Lacey's mom could be, but there's also another interesting tie and connection between her and Lacey as well as Clay. And that is the fact that Anthea can actually be found residing in Driftvale City along with her sister Concordia in Pokemon Black and White 2 in the Team Plasma safe house, which also just so happens to sit right next to Clay's gym. This is as far as the Anthea theory goes, admittedly, because there's not really anything else to tie Anthea and Clay together past this, at least that I could find, but this, I feel, is much more substantial than anything that the Alessa theory provides. And while I personally am not ready to say I'm convinced of this idea and don't think it's anything definitive whatsoever, I feel like it's a somewhat intriguing option that's definitely more plausible than the Alessa idea. The other option here is a bit of a wild card, admittedly, but there is evidence in support of it, and that is Whitney, the gym leader of Goldenrod City in the Johto region. Now, before you all go crazy in the comments, there's actually some solid evidence to back this up. Number one is the fact that Whitney obviously has pink hair, just like Lacey does. Number two is the fact that we also do know that Whitney has been to Driftvale City because she has participated in the Pokemon World Tournament. So she would have had the opportunity to come across Clay in the Unova region and potentially, maybe years down the line, have Lacey as their daughter. Admittedly, that does sound a bit crazy now that I say it out loud, but at the very least, the evidence is consistent with this idea. Another thing, though, that makes Whitney really interesting with regards to this idea, especially when you stack it on top of the other evidence, is the fact that she uses a Clefairy, which is a fairy-type Pokemon, which is the type that Lacey specializes in. Granted, Clefairy wasn't a fairy type back when Whitney last used it as a gym leader in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but that was simply because the fairy type didn't exist yet. So now that Clefairy is a fairy type, that definitely makes a connection between the two characters. And another interesting, probably circumstantial, but intriguing connection between Whitney and this whole idea is the fact that Whitney gets her name in multiple languages, in fact, from the word white, which is really interesting when we're talking in the context of Unova-related stuff, which obviously has to do with Pokemon Black and Black and White 2, the games that the Unova region features in. Again, I am definitely not going to say that I definitively think that Whitney is Lacey's mom, because I very much still feel like this is an unsolved mystery, because I just don't think there's enough conclusive evidence for any character at this time, and who knows, Lacey's mom could also be a new character we have yet to meet, or maybe won't be specified at all. But in terms of Anthea and Whitney, it is intriguing how there is some connections we can make here that could make them at least plausible candidates, and at the very least, I feel like these candidates, for as crazy as they might seem, are a lot more plausible than Alessa, who I feel like just doesn't have any connections or any real chance to be Lacey's mom at all. And now we come to the second big unsolved mystery from this DLC, and that is simply, what is next? What is coming now that we've pretty much wrapped up Pokemon Scarlet and Violet? Well, first things first, we do literally know what's coming next, and that is the epilogue to the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet DLC that is going to be released on January 11th, and is going to feature that mythical Peach Pokemon that has been teased throughout the DLC itself. However, past that, past the DLC, into next year in 2024, what is going to happen next? Well, the reason why I thought this was worth talking about is because for a while it didn't seem like this was an unsolved mystery at all. It seemed very much like we're for sure gonna get a Unova remake type of game of some kind, whether it's Legends or Black and White 3, but now the community seems kind of torn on that idea. The Indigo Disk DLC is very heavily Unova focused, and there are Unova references and Easter eggs all throughout it, and that has kind of created a sentiment that maybe because the Indigo Disk is so heavily focused on Unova, that we aren't actually going to get that Unova revisit. Because if we were going to get a game like that next year, why would they already put so much Unova content in this DLC? You could also argue that all of the Unova hints and things that were going on prior to the Indigo Disk were simply for the Indigo Disk itself as opposed to a whole new game. So now it just seems like there's more uncertainty surrounding what the next game is going to be than there was before. Now that we have the Indigo Disk under our belts though, and we know what it consists of, I personally think it would be a little weird if we had all of these very heavy Unova references and connections between Paldea and Unova made in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet simply for the purpose of one half of a DLC, and one that didn't even really feature Unova all that much anyway, since obviously Blueberry Academy is detached from the rest of the Unova region. Because there are some extremely heavy Unova connections, not just in the Indigo Disk DLC, but in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the base games more specifically, which just seems kind of redundant if they were being made just for this DLC. It feels like to me that the DLC is too small of a thing for these ginormous and crazy big Unova connections. The other thing that kind of muddies this whole idea up of what is coming next for Pokemon has to do with Johto. There's been a ton of focus on Unova lately, and it's pretty much been the consensus that we're going to get a new Unova game next year, but there's also been a lot of Johto connections going on as well that a lot of people have taken note of too, including myself. Before all of this Unova stuff came about, I was actually saying shortly after the release of Scarlet and Violet that I felt like a Johto game could potentially be coming next, simply because of all of the connections that are being made in Scarlet and Violet to Johto, just like they are to Unova. Johto is also a generation that is much more due for a revisit than Unova is at this time, so it's way more apt to get that kind of treatment than Unova is, whereas Unova just seems like that's a bit abrupt and a bit too soon, even though the evidence has been really substantial. There's even been an idea proposed within the community that we could potentially be getting both Johto and Unova representation in some way, shape, or form next year, where potentially we get a past-focused Johto game and a future-focused Unova game, which fits perfectly for both of those regions and generations and what they represent. But then, it's also a bit of a pipe dream to expect 2 whole games to come out within the next year that focus on 2 different generations and regions that are also of the Legends remake type of experience. That's just a bit too much to reasonably ask for. But then, we can also pretty much say that we know that something is coming, since Pokemon pretty much release a new game every year, unless they release DLC, which they did this year, but Gen 10 is a bit too far off because that'll probably come at least 3 years after Scarlet and Violet, which will be 2025, if not 2026 for the 30th anniversary, which means we've got to have some kind of remake, revisit type of game if there is going to be a new game, which there is most likely going to be, as we've already said. So where does that leave us? Well, I honestly don't know how the whole Johto wrinkle ties into all of this, if it will at all, but if I had to personally put my own 2 cents on this and give my best guess, I feel like that the Indigo Disk DLC, with all of its Unova attention, even if it was very, very heavy, I feel like this is sort of a lead-in to what is coming next, and it is the stepping stone from Scarlet and Violet to this brand new Unova game, whatever it is, that is going to take place in the future, hence why we're getting adjusted to future Unova now in this DLC, and that is going to sort of complete an arc of all of the recent Pokemon games, where you had Legends Arceus in 2022 that was focused in the past, and then you had Scarlet and Violet later that year that was focused in the present and had a lot to do with time travel, and now we'll have this Unova-focused game that is going to take place in the future that sort of just completes this time travel, time-focused trio of games over the past couple of years. So if I had to just give my best guess, I would still say Pokemon Black and White 3 is what we will see next year, or something to that effect, where it's a new Unova game that takes place in the future compared to the original Unova games, which is why I think Black and White 3 would be a perfect fit as another sequel to sort of make all of the Unova games into a trilogy. It is still very much an unsolved mystery though, just like the identity of Lacey's mom is, and so now I want to know what you guys think about these mysteries. Be sure to let me know any thoughts you have about what I've said or any ideas that you have yourself in the comments below. I would love to check them out and hear them, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already for more as well, because it really helps out and is very much appreciated. If you'd like to further support the channel as well, you can also check out my Pokemon remixes on Spotify, as well as other music streaming services. That helps out a ton as well, right back here on the YouTube channel, and is also very much appreciated. I will also be back with another brand new video very soon as well, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And until then, as always, thank you guys so much for watching this one. I really, really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.